O labing makagagahom nga amay namon sa langit, mahinuklugon nga laon nga tagtugas ang langit, hangin, kalayo, tubig kag duta. Tanda ining imong timawa, kabay ining pag-ampo, magadulot sa amon sang kabuhi nga himaya. Salamat sa mga bugay nga imo ginpaambit sa amon. Salamat sa kabuhi nga ginadulot mo sa amon nga himpit. Salamat sa maayo nga panahon kag ilabi na gid sang imo katutom sa amon. Bendisyon ni ang imo katawhan. Bendisyon ni ang ila mga palangabuhian. Bendisyon ni ang mga panggas sa amon mga talamnan. Bendisyon ni ang ilang nga paglugayawan sa iban nga kapungsuran. Kabay makalabot sila nga walay sablag sa ila pagapadulungan. Kag ilabi na gid, bendisyon ni ining isla sang Negros nga amon natawhan. Kinahalad namon ang ining pag-ampo para sa imo kadayawan.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Independence Day, Philippine Independence Day. I hope everyone is safe and healthy. We continue today our virtual conference, and today we are featuring our exhibition for the Visayas Islands Visual Arts Exhibition and Conference. So today, I would like to introduce to you our one of our curators. Today we have a seminar on a possible exhibition, and featuring Kalibutan, the World in Mind, featuring the regional curators from the 3 regions of the Visayas Islands. Next slide, please. Would like to introduce to you our a curator from Region 7 who will lead us um, to a prayer. Mr. J. Hore.
Karon mga taknaa atong handumon ang atong higala nga si Leo Abaya. Makagagahom ug tunhay nga Dios, Ginoo sa tanan. Bathala ng aming mga ninuno. Gisimba sa among mga katigulangan. Ikaw maghuhupay sa among kasubo. Ikaw kadasig sa among kasakit. Kami ay nagpapasalamat at nagbibigay puri sa iyong kadakilaan. We thank you for the gift of life of our dear friend, mentor, and fellow Bisaya, among pinalanggang Leo Abaya. Ulabang bathala sa kahitasan, adlaw nga masinag, adlaw nga sa kinabuhi, sa among higala, Abay Leo, kanunay nagabay. Sa iyang paghalin ni ining kinabuhia, siya nagbilin og mga maanindot nga kasinatian uban kanamo. Ang iyang kinabuhi sulundon, ang iyang kahibalo, talento talagsaon. He has touched the lives of many. He has been a source of inspiration for those who continue to strive to master their talents and use them in transforming the lives of people and communities. Karon ni ining mga taknaa, amo siyang gihandom, amo siyang gipasidunggan, isip talagsaong anak sa Kabisayan. Nang hinaot kami nga ang among mga tingog, among mga pangamuyo, inubanan sa imong kaayo, magdala ni Abay Leo ngadto sa lawak nga masadya, sa lugar nga siya magmugna sa walay katapusang alampat, siya unya sa saktong higayon among makita, makauban sa dakong kahingpitan. At this point, we will now proceed with our webinar. And to start with the morning's discussion, next slide. I'd like to introduce to our viewers, our participants in this morning's webinar, no other than the head curator of the Kalibutan, the World in Mind. Please welcome our very fresh this morning, our head curator, Sir Patrick Flores. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Jay. Thank you for that beautiful prayer for Leo. I'm sure Leo is with us today, sharing the fruits of our curatorial labor for Kalibutan. So this is the last node of the nodes of the curatorial mode that we call the possible exhibition for Kalibutan, the World in Mind. It is a possible exhibition because it anticipates a series or relays of calibrations along the way in light of the pandemic, and also in light of the curatorial system that we put in place, that it is protracted and patiently crawling across time. So the Node 4 is titled Exhibition, Not Exhibition. We complicate the idea of exhibition and that we do not confine curatorial work uh, to exhibition making. Curators do other things besides exhibition. And so the exhibition need not be the only intelligible materialization of curatorial work, although it has its own potential as a specific modality. And so we will still have an exhibition, but this is not the entire story of Kalibutan. So the discussion today will revolve around two questions. One will focus on reflection on the things that we have done over time since December, and then the other one will focus on projection, meaning what we can do next month for the exhibition period, the so-called exhibition period, which is not the the entire story, as I mentioned, of Kalibutan. So the first question is, what has changed in your perception of curatorial practice as you work on the processes of research, production, and recalibration? You may cite one case in point to flesh out your thoughts around this question. On my part, for instance, I I realized that as I was working with Leo Abaya on his diorama project, the uh, the the project took a life of its own, and that the things that we have agreed upon at the start uh, kept on changing for I think for the better. And so this is one realization as a curator to give the uh, to give the project a chance to unfold on its own through its own logic and dynamic. No? So I would like now to call on Gwen to share her thoughts on this question in reference to a particular artist for Viva. So Gwen, good morning.
Good morning. Morning, Ida. So, for the reflection uh, about this task for the research for Kalibutan and the calibration process, I tried to go back during the first meeting where, which was also the only face-to-face meeting that we had, the whole curatorial team. I remember something that you said, Sir Pat, that Viva is for the artists. And that thought became like a takeoff point of every endeavor ever since for me. And one of my realizations was really it's like a culmination. Like as I researched, the reflection and the realizations tend to grow. The theme which tackles the world and consciousness is clearly a continuum, and everything we have learned and done through this will simply go on, whether it be in ripples or in waves. The research directs you towards the importance and wisdom found in being there for others, whether this means an artist for another artist, a curator for the artist to the community, and so on. The research and recalibration let me absorb so many wonderful knowledge and ways of inquiry from writers, philosophers, scientists, and friends that I possibly would not have encountered otherwise. One of my newest favorite words to date is, next slide please, is interbeing. Just looking at this word already seems like it says it all. Inter meaning between, and being, this word is attached to us, human being. This is the consciousness part that elevates us from the animal kingdom. So being not just in the existing entity, but the sense of presence. It basically says everything needs everything else. This made me see how humble and quiet the task of the curator really is. There is more strength in listening, observing, and simply getting out of your own head and out of the way in order to be effective. It also made me reflect on what Susan Sontag said about interpretation, again with the word inter, which means between, and the real or the original meaning of interpretation from the Latin word interpretari does not really mean to excavate, but to understand. So if we look at the word interpretation, it simply means between understandings. And this is very meaningful for curators. Next slide, please. So, okay, let me get. I formed this like flow chart of interbeing as a curator, like, just to get a visual flow of it. Once you encounter a content, automatically you try to understand it because the brain tries to get. It is natural for the brain to try and comprehend it. But before that, you have to first divide it equally, understanding it in your own way, and trying to get the understanding of others. And then that's when you make the articulation. So that you again form another layer of understanding. And when you encounter the content once more, it is already a conscious perception of it. Next slide, please. So I would like to kind of situate the thought through the artist Denly Chavez. And I would like to show that this process made me appreciate her as an artist. And it made me dig deeper into how she is as a storyteller. Um, and the film itself is just like the conversation between the curator and the artist. But I got to appreciate the wholeness of the artist, how she is as an actor, as an at the center of the craft itself, and she is also the writer, the horizon, overseeing everything, the plot, and as a director, she circumnavigates the entire film. So getting this layer of understanding Denly made me appreciate her content now even more. So maybe simply, I'd like to close the answer with that yes, indeed, Viva is for the artist. The artist, in turn, is for the community. In other words, we are simply here for one another, and we are the interbeing. That's all.
Thank you, Gwen, for that enlightening sharing. I now call on Libby.
Good morning.
Good morning, Libby.
Yes. Um, my previous perception on curatorial practice is shaped by my provinciano or rural origin and has evolved with my education as a fine arts student, as well as my being an art educator, curating for students or faculty exhibits. Here in Iloilo, where there are no commercial galleries or big and long established museums, we only experience very few curated shows. One of it was by the late Peke Galiaga, Pasaway in 2006. I was with Manny during that time. We did it at Museo Iloilo. And another one was with User Patrick during the Viva XCon Turns in Form 2016, and also the exhibits at Casa Real in Capitol. And another for Panay Island was the one at Rojas City for Viva XCon 2018. To me, it was Xavi Ledesma who pushed us to come up with different yung not ordinary exhibits kasi 'di ba usually dito nangyayari um, magkayayaan lang yung mga artists and then parang magsasabit ng artwork. So parang ganun lang yung perception dati. And it was Zafi Ledesma who pushed us to come up with new ways to make exhibits at the space of Museo Iloilo in between 2004 and then until his death sa 2009. So that scene describes our lack or need for curators in Panay and especially here in Iloilo. So being involved in this curatorial team, syempre naiya naman ako. I prepared for for this project. And nagagaling kasi naman kasama ko dito, di ba? And I'm not, parang I was not prepared for this because ang gusto ko talaga nung bata pa is I just wanted to visualize or to paint or to draw. Parang para sa akin parang math itong curatorial. So inaral ko kasi ayaw kong mapahiya and nanghulungkat ako. Next slide please. Meron ba yan? Okay. Nanghulungkat ako ng books and yung mga materials na kinukuha ko sa mga exhibits as a student. And kasi wala yun dito eh. Wala yung mga brochures, walang documentation, yung magagandang nakasulat. So dati nababasa ko yun but I was not really serious about it until na naging involved ako dito sa curatorial project. And kasi dati hindi ko iniintindi. Pero let's like I had these questions. Pakibalik muna sa how do we thrive? Parang yan yung isa sa mga nabasa ko sa magandang libro na nandito sa akin. Pero pang dito naulit ko siyang basahin ito sa book ni Hans Obrist, isang curator, na parang ito yung magiging parang nag-guide sa akin na parang how do you make artists thrive in their community? So parang ito yung kailangan ko dito sa as an artist dito sa Iloilo because as a young artist gusto mo sana mag-curate din sa shows mo pero wala hindi nangyari yon kasi wala ngang curators. And next slide please. So it also arrived to me that this question how to understand the world we are in. Kasi parang ang daming confusion with the kind of politics or religions and businesses. Parang hindi mo alam kung saan magsisimula. So may question ka, how do you understand the world we are in? Next slide please. And bilang nasa margins kasi probinsyano, walang mga museums and galleries, we don't have parang lagi kang how are we included in this formal curated shows. Next. And also how are our voices and stories heard? Kasi nga based on my experience yung focus talaga is sa Metro Manila. And kung dito ka man, parang although nag-exhibit ka, parang wala pa rin hindi pa rin napapansin ng mga tao 'yon. Next slide please. So itong magandang na-learn ko sa isa sa mga webinars ngayong pandemic. This was shared sa isang talk ni Marika Constantino. This also guided me kahit na may idea na ako about heritage pero this gave me a better understanding of why am I doing these heritage projects to better understand and to share yung valuing nito and caring sa others to enjoy also our tangible and intangible heritage. Next slide, please. Ito naman natutunan ko kay kay Dr. Dayang Iraula sa archiving projects niya that we need to organize, retrieve, and extend yung mga archival materials natin. Next slide, please. And this diagram, kasi we also have another project na ginagawa for our organization. And this can be related sa mga ginagawa ko din for Sugidanon, the Panay mythology. So nagbigay ito ng magandang picture kung paano ko naintindihan at nagbago yung perception ko about curatorship. Next slide please. So dito tayo sa research. Dati hindi ko gaanong ang dami kong beses na nag-fail dito, sir. Kasi Tagalog yung research sa UP. Coming from Iloilo, I have to adjust. So akala ko yung iniiwasan kong subject, yun din pala yung mapupuntahan ko. And then after graduating, napunta ako doon sa Pro Productions. I was a production assistant trainee. And then that link, na akala ko walang mangyayari. Kasi ayaw ko rin naman ng mga talagang editing for videos. Pero that experience taught me how to do research and nakilala ko yung Panay mythology because they featured Federico Caballero in 2004. Next slide please. And ito yung mga nahalungkat ko ng mga libro and yung mga dito pati yung communication book ko. And na-realize ko na ito pala yung mga data na pwede naming gamitin for the heritage projects. Marami, maliban sa mga printed, marami talagang non-print sources and unpublished sources. So maganda kasi binalikan ko yung dating libro and yung binasa ko ulit yung mga libro na nandito lang pero hindi ko pinapansin gaano. Next slide please. So kasi difficult ngayon yung production kasi we are limited with yung ating mobility ngayon is instead of physical, virtual na. So nagbago yung ways of thinking, naging more patient ka on the time and lalo na may mga physical na kailangan sana pero hindi na matutuloy. So I have to learn the new tools, yung mga itong web Zoom and file sharing sa Google Drive para parang feeling mo pa rin magkakasama kami ng mga artists. Next slide please. And so also comes the recalibration, palaging nag-uusap through this new ways of communication via the internet. Next slide, please. And so, dahil nga sa pandemic, we are also limited with the physical transportation. So, kung ano lang talaga yung nahagilap ng team for the Western Visayas Built Heritage Docu, we are working on it like with the sound, with the text and images na available. So buti nga nakapag-shoot din kami while we can walk around the city of Iloilo in March and in April. And so we are working on what we have right now. That's the case with Farida Cabayao and Ron Espinosa. And also because TM Malones is away, nandun siya sa Metro Manila. So yung magiging interaction would be using talaga the virtual communications and file sharing. That's it, Sir Patrick.
Thank you, Libby, for that. I now we'll now proceed with the curators from Region 7, beginning with Jay. Jay, please, good morning.
Yes, good morning, Sir Pat. So, with my reflections, I think i-copy-paste ko na lang din yung sagot ni Libby. I share a lot of sentiments and experience ni Libby in terms of the curatorial practice in the context of the province where I come from, and that is Cebu. And the idea of curation and curatorial practice really was introduced to me when I moved to Manila and studied in Diliman, and I was able to go around art institutions and museums, galleries, and was able to kind of join openings, and around this time, curatorial practice and the idea of curation uh, was something that I begin to take interest in. And as for this particular project in with Viva, my realizations working with the artists from Cebu, and the limitations brought about by the pandemic. Can we move to yes? What became very apparent to me in this experience is the social dimension of the curatorial practice. In the past, or as many of the museum goers or gallery goers, they would be able to see the exhibition curated by someone with the finished works, finished objects exhibited in a given space. And for me, it sometimes does not reveal the kind of process that it under and it moves in with. Sorry. Uh, the particular experience I have with this project is that I cannot but deal with relationships with my artists, with the people that we interview, that we collaborate, and meaning to say that this project has given me that very important aspect of the curatorial, that it is always enmeshed in the social, it is interwoven in a network of human relationships. I have to really work hard with the for example, the collective from Cebu, because they have different dynamics and different ideas of what the project could ultimately produce. But these things you have to deal with, as well as bringing them or into a realization that the project that we are doing is in fact a very different one, because we have to do field work, which is for the artists, it's something that they are not used to, because they are always most of the times they are there in their studio and they kind of work things out from their own understanding of things. And when we tried to move into communities and tried to do the interviews in the midst of the limitations of the pandemic, it's something that also very refreshing on my part as a curator, as I listen to the artists and their realization of how important this social dimension, not just of curatorial practice, but even in their art making, is creating a good a ground for where they can start doing their project. And together with the practice of the curatorial and the social, next slide. I really like how Sir Patrick put up frame the question and the process from the research, ano nga yun? Research, production, and then recalibration. For me, the curatorial practice at this point that has given me a new perspective of the curatorial practice is the recalibration aspect of the process. Because in most cases, and my experience with my curatorial projects in the past, the design of the project, the concept of the project has been there preconceived, and you have to work really hard to make it happen. And as much as possible, you contain all the conditions to make it happen. And so the idea of recalibration, given the context of the pandemic and how each and every one of us in the curatorial team had experienced it, recalibration is very it liberates us from our earlier notions of our curatorial ideas and concepts, which for me is very very important now that these things had happened, I began to understand better how curatorial work should be done, and how important the ideas of accidents, exemptions, experimentations, if not for considering recalibration as part of the process, it would be very hard for a curatorial project to be effective or kanang produce something important, especially in the context of the pandemic. So I really thank Sir Patrick for including recalibration in that process. And so it is not anymore a procedural or linear process. It goes into a series of sprints, parang ikot-ikot siya, until you get to get that feeling that you have something here that's worthwhile to share, worthwhile to exhibit. I think that's what the entire experience and my reflection, the entire Viva experience has given me, and I'm very thankful. I think that would be all, sir.
Thank you, Jay. That's a great reflection. We can discuss more later, no? Maria, your turn. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Morning, Pat. Morning, everyone. So, for me, it's not about a change in perception per se. I came into this project with an open mind since I really did not know how to be a curator. And I really was thinking about this project from the perspective of an artist. As someone with an intimate knowledge of the artistic process and the challenges that artists face in their own various stages of research and production. I'm going to try to answer this question by thinking about the work of retired artist and taking a cue from her keywords that she, from her last presentation, of which there are 5: land, leisure, labor, locus, and learning. I've been thinking about these words since they were offered by the artist as key terms in which to organize her recent activities. So in a way, this answer is also a response to that. Next slide, please. Her work, Harana, has appeared in various iterations over the years, but it's interesting to note that one of the earliest moments in the development of this work was a performance at her own wedding, wherein she cut pieces of her wedding dress to be taken away by her family and friends. What I always liked about Harana was its fragility as performance, its ability to move in and out of whatever it is that we think constitutes art. In the latter stages, Harana almost seemed to disappear into life. And it does so productively because life was always its territory. Here we see an image of recentering and a kind of recalibration effort. In this image, the artist tending to a plot of land where she has been growing her material since last year. This image is of retired artists, examining construction work in a plot in Look in Dumaguete. I think this is a plot that she's had for some time, but she only started to really look into during the pandemic. So next slide, please. So this is an image of what the artist calls an aquaponic papag for growing leafy greens. With this image, I refer to the pleasures of production, where for me, leisure and labor are the same. The pandemic was a destabilizing force that did not allow for the usual movements and the usual approaches to being in a project. Already, in the shift from artist to curator, there was a distance from things that as an artist, I would have fully enjoyed. At times, I found myself shifting gears to that of an observer, although not a passive one because I hope I did my best. Being close to the sites of production, not being able to being able to hang out in person, to talk, have meals together. These are also important and are the usual things missed in this pandemic. I think I took a lot of comfort and energy that retired artist in her tending to this plot of land had found a way to instinctively register the passing of time in this past year. Next slide, please. I've been thinking about this image of a shaped carrot in terms of the last two terms, locus and learning, and how mesmerizing it was to watch such a simple activity unfold on video. I also tried to imagine the other times, at the times that we've not witnessed, the times in the past, in the various iterations of Harana that this action was performed. It's precise, simple, arbitrary, and a bit mysterious. Clearly, this activity is a site of learning for the artist. It's generative, it creates pleasure and knowledge. Um, so finally, I would like to add one more word for us to consider, which is contingency. I think most good artwork are almost always in a state of being contingent, perhaps in ways that are related to chance or in terms of responding to the unexpected or the unknown. On the other hand, this doesn't necessarily translate into constant action or big action. It can translate to readiness, perhaps even readiness approaching stillness, or even to making do with what the situation brings. Making do is such a diminutive or minor action. I guess in the scale of possible responses, it's minor, but I think this can be very productive and generate new ways of making, as in the case of retired artist growing vegetables in her garden. Should I move on to the second question?
Not yet, Maria.
Okay.
Later na. Are you done with the first?
Yeah, that's sort of my response.
Salamat. That's a good point, Maria, on the idea of the minor, but also the punctual. No, it's minor, but it's punctual. It's ready. No?
It's ready.
Yeah. So we now go to summer and later. We begin with Mars.
Hi, everyone. So for the first question, which is about reflections, in terms of changes in my perception of curatorial practice, there's really not so much past experience yet with which to compare my current experience in curating for Viva. But I'll just try to reflect upon my perception of curatorial practice in the general sense and in the specific sense of curating for Viva, which has been a remote kind of curatorial practice for the most part. Uh, so next slide. This is how I thought about exploring that question. So there's the idea of sociality, as Jay also mentioned earlier, and subjectivity. So the idea of curating as a means of collaborating with others. And these three are what I'll be further exploring. Actually, the last one involving audiences, I just decided not to talk about it perhaps later in the second question because it's more relevant to it. But yeah, next slide. So the first one, in terms of the people involved in this collaborative endeavor that is called curation, I thought about the question of are the roles and agencies of artist, curator, and audience being rethought, or actually this should be redescribed? Are the roles and agencies being rethought or redescribed, and if so, how? Uh, in in uh, in one of the previous Viva conferences we had earlier this year, I shared my assessment of the art world and its production in my locality. Um, I said that it could benefit much from more circulation of ideas, objects, practices, individuals, and roles within the art and culture scene and outside it. I also said that I was and still am looking forward to seeing more collaboration among various people to possibly transform the structure that is the art world. For example, collaborations among a visual artist, a cartographer, and an activist, and the possibilities that could emerge from this collaboration. I talked about being interested in turning the art world from a cosmos with its rigidity and its sense of order and systematicity that shift from cosmos into Kalibutan with its shifts, turns, and slippages, and the um, how things could suddenly turn around. The unexpected that is imminent in Kalibutan. Uh, However, in the thick of a pandemic, when most communication and social interactions happen remotely, I'm not sure whether collaboration among individuals with various backgrounds is being made more or less possible. Uh, I mean, for instance, face to face interactions outside one's existing social circle may be impractical or even dangerous because our social bubbles are permeable, and in a pandemic we have to guard it more vigilantly. And if you have a social circle that is homogenous, if it's a social circle of people whose interests, skills, and views are broadly akin to your own, maybe say because you're working in the same place, then that could be limiting opportunities to collaborate with others in the sense that I talked about, the different agencies, for example, or different subjectivities. In the case of Papa Mascol's project, for example, she originally proposed to interact with healthcare workers and do some sort of ethnographic work in hospitals. But this turned out to be logistically impractical given the health protocols. And I mean, this might seem like an extreme example because, for sure, in a pandemic, this would be a very high risk methodology. And also, one could say that remote or virtual communication is there anyway. And that's why, for example, we are here in this virtual webinar room, and then Viva is happening. Uh, but for other people who are still not coming to terms with communicating online, or are struggling to communicate through virtual platforms, and there are those people. Given that context, how much agency do they have really in the more collaborative and expansive art world that I was initially thinking of? Um, the next slide, please. So I also thought about curation as caring for ideas. Well, the word curare, to which curation or curate is traced, um, speaks about caring. And in this case, I think curating is first and foremost a way of caring for or taking care of ideas, and which happens in research and production, and of course in the subsequent steps where the work may be recalibrated. In this case, for example, this involved sharing readings and then having, or at least planning to have reading sessions with the artists, sharing articles with the artists or mentioning concepts. As you can see in the slide, I sent a reading. It's a sound studies reader. I sent this to Popo because her work is it concerns the sonic. So I was reading parts of the book as well, the essays in this anthology, and I was sharing to her because we also get to we would get to interact face to face. So sometimes we would have conversations about what I've read, and yeah. So she's probably also explored the reading that I gave her or that I recommended. So aside from sharing readings, mentioning concepts, and well, just the correspondences you have, diba? In our correspondences, for example, I and the artists have been taking care of ideas from their germination, from the artist's imagination, to their development and recalibration through different phases, and then through the changing circumstances of the last months and even the last year. So for this, our conversations, chats, and email threads become archives that record the development of ideas. And it was crucial to keep track of conceptual developments because of the very elusiveness and volatility of ideas vis-a-vis the concreteness and materiality of objects and face-to-face interactions. Uh, well, but of course, RV and Popo's works naman have their own materiality, and you can speak, for example, of the materiality of the virtual. Um, sometimes actually I also reevaluate and reflect upon how I am caring for the ideas. Am I overthinking? Am I being pedantic? How do I, for example, how do I know what details are unimportant and which ones are worthy of attention, or how do I make it worthy of attention? Yeah. So next slide actually is about involving audiences, but like I said, I'm going to talk about this in the second question. So that's it for the first one, for the reflection.
Thank you, Mars, and thank you for bringing in Kalibutan not only as a conceptual category but also a curatorial method. No, I think in your discussion, uh, Kalibutan would cease to be just an idea, no, or a word, but also a uh, a way of doing things, no, at
Yes.
least in this case curatorially. So thank you. Now, last but not the least, of course, Nomar from. May we hear your thoughts?
Uh,
Good morning, Nomar.
Good morning, Sir Patrick, and good morning to everybody. Okay, to answer the question posed by Sir Patrick, I will be referencing the project of the Regional Art Forum for Kalibutan. Okay. And this is mainly because RAF is, of course, close to my heart because I am one of the creators of RAF. And also, I was the one who requested RAF members to form a team to produce an art project for Viva. I was the one who urged them to come up with the project. So, well, okay, I see myself primarily as a practicing visual artist, but I do know that I do consider curation per se as a kind of creative practice as well. Okay, so, having said that, okay, I know that I have many things to learn about art curation, which is the main reason why I accepted the challenge of doing the project. And that is to learn more about curation. I learned so many things here, but my take on curation, I think, proceeds from my situatedness in art, my embeddedness in art practice. Okay. That is being a practicing artist myself. So first, I learned that research or inquiry is integral to the curation as a creative process. But then again, research here could mean entirely something else for me. Here, research could mean an engagement with and an interrogation of the very architecture of art, the how and the why we do art, which means that I need to deploy my own contexts or biases as an artist in framing and in the presentation of artists and works. I learned that curation is not just about the selection, of course, of artists and the practice of making works of art palatable to the public. In fact, I learned that curation is a form of intervention in the way art and artists are presented to certain publics with S, in plural form. But in fact, the very notion of public in art context can be interrogated in art curation. I learned that as well. Art curation can interrogate the way art gets talked about and the way stories are told about art, artists, and institutions. And art curation can be conceived as an inquiry or engagement with the very values that underpin art, how tradition, for example, shape the valuations of art and how these traditions and the evaluations that are offshoots of these traditions are interrogated by the selection of artists and the presentation of the works of these artists to a conceived public. So for me, art curation, this is what I learned recently. Art curation may interrogate the operative notions that make art work, like artistic agency, the aesthetic, the public of art. What do we mean by that? What do we mean by autonomy? Especially in a third world context, what do we mean by that? Autonomy. What do we mean by mediations in art? How about histories of art? The artificial origin of the notion, not art per se, but the notion of art. The origin of that? The communities of art, the ethics, or even biology. The pandemic has in fact shown us that biology is not a neutral and was in fact never neutral in the first place. We've realized because of the pandemic that art involves the modality of the flesh that the human body is always involved in the production, distribution, consumption, and also the discriminations within art. But that a certain ecology of art, what we call the art world, regulates the interactions of bodies in our community. So curation for Viva helped me realize that the market and art institutions, the schools of art, for instance, may not even be the constitutive features of arts ecology. Rather, what we have are ecologies of art. Well, markets and institutions are parts of a certain ecology, but that ecology is not the only ecology of art, meaning art curation makes us question our default assumptions about art practice, about the spaces of art, and about the spaces for art. Meaning our default assumptions also about the public or publics of art, and our default assumptions about the very practice of art curation per se. Curation can be reflective and self-reflexive, just like art. And that is siguro mainly because I am coming from that horizon. So the emergency I learned, the pandemic has actually shown us the shaky or even the artificiality of the infrastructures of art practice and curation. Think of Viva, for example, or the Biennale format. But what is the Biennale in the context of shared virtuality of space? What is the Biennale there? What is the Visayas in Viva? If the encounters occur in a shared virtuality of space, where is the Visayas there? Is it even can we still consider it a Biennale? So is the city still a paradigmatic variable in the constitution of biennales? Diba? Think of that. But more so, think of verbs like selecting, collecting, presenting, framing, archiving, actions and gestures that are constitutive of the practice of curation. Our engagement with the curation for Viva Expo has shown us that these gestures are investments of prior articulations. These are investments of power and traditions. The pandemic has shown us this because we have, to a certain extent, through our recalibration, we've managed to navigate the difficulties posed by the health protocols. The protocols imposed on bodies as the spatial entities. And we've even managed to dismiss the default articulations of art practice and exhibition, as we will talk about later. The selection, the framing, and the presenting of works are preferences that insinuate the presence of prior investments. They are not simply there, they represent and embody something. They embody potent agencies. Therefore, these gestures may be interrogated as well. In fact, I can now claim that perhaps I am overstating this claim, but I'll say it anyway, that I can claim that the return to the defaults of art practice and reception prior to the pandemic, and all the self-arrogated entitlements of certain actors and agencies in the art world must be resisted after the pandemic. These are my realizations that I learned in doing this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Nomar, for those questions. Very difficult questions, but very unavoidable questions as we face the future of curatorial work after the pandemic. Yeah. Now we go to the second question, and we begin with Nomar in this regard. The second question has something to do with projection. No? So the first one zeroed in on reflection. We now move on to projection. And the question is, in light of this reflection, the reflection you just gave, I mean, all of you, how do you propose to render present and sensible a particular project without being confined to the default option of an exhibition? Because this is the point. No? Viva has always expected an exhibition, and it has become some kind of a norm or a almost a deterministic option. But the pandemic has allowed us to rethink that, not only during the pandemic, but maybe after the pandemic. So, so if the project requires, and I'd like you to speak to one project now, to cite a case in point. So if the project requires a physical exhibition, or if it can address a physical exhibition context, how now do you think about this mode of exhibition or the model of exhibition making in general? So if one is not, if when you think that one, if a project is not, that it's not productive to render it present or sensible through an exhibition model, then you can talk about that. But if it does lend itself to some kind of physicality, then how do you think through that physicality? Anyway, my example is the work of Josh Serafin, one of my artists who I'm working with, who is based in Brussels, who is a dancer and visual artist. And so through Zoom meetings, we discussed what he could present. No? But in the course of our discussion, he was already presenting archival and research material that he, on his own, uploaded on Facebook. So I think that was an impulse that it was an impulse I didn't coordinate. No, it was from his own volition to do that, and I'm interested in that kind of direct distribution of material of an artist through social media, which the curator cannot fully control. No, how that is distributed across. So I'm interested. That one struck me, and also the idea of an exhibition, physical exhibition in Bacolod, because he is away. No? He is in Brussels, and and this includes performance. No? So how do we do that? Of course, the default option would be documentation of performance, but maybe we can think beyond that. So we were thinking, we talked about a possible offsite Viva in Brussels. That so he is now talking with some contacts in Brussels to find a space for this performance to happen and for these works to be presented in relation to the performance. I was also thinking that if this, prospect falls through, then the room, his room, his small room, his small room in Brussels could be his Kalibutan, because it is his Kalibutan during the pandemic. So we could turn the room into an exhibition space, meaning the studio as a curatorial site. So those are my thoughts with regard to Josh Serafin, but everything is still in play, and we are discussing options at the moment. So Nomar, please respond to this question. We begin with you, and then we move on to the other curators.
Yeah, I'd like to. I'll be referencing again the project of Regional Art Forum, because it had given me so many a number of revelations in the past months. Okay, so the project of RAF, Regional Forum here, has prompted me to ask important questions about curation. So RAF's project is actually critical of recent denominations in collaborative art and community socially engaged artworks, because they see these denominations are somehow they serve now as extensions of governmentality. So collaboration here appears. It appears that it does not only pertain to collaborative art as a new public art genre, collaboration in creative practice is not new anyway. So, but I think they are referring to collaboration in a more general sense. Think of like urban design or filmmaking, or architectural practice, where we need to collaborate with the construction of works. Think of collaboration in a corporate setting. Think of the private-public partnerships that are that involve design visionaries in the country. So collaboration in art, I suppose, implicates the operation of state power and traditions in the organization and regulation of like bodies in space. So Raf knows, of course, that PPPs, these private-public partnerships, help maintain the what so-called exclusions in spaces. This is happening now in Cebu. Case in point here is the privatization of an important public space in Cebu, Cebu's carbon public market. There was actually I will go to my point how I would manifest the work later. There was actually a similar case that happened in Cebu before, which revealed the hidden apparatus of like how modern power works. In the organization of space, there was an issue that pitted architects, designers, and artists against the Cebu City Council before. I think it was in 2012, if my memory serves me right. Yeah, it was the issue about the construction of a number of flyovers at the urban cores of the Cebu. The movement that opposed the construction of flyovers in the city was successful. Actually, they were able to stop the construction of flyovers, and that's precisely because the people who were involved in the movement were the agencies that are expected to collaborate or negotiate with power. Meaning, these are the architects, the artists, the expert insiders in terms of recalibration and reshaping spaces. These are the experts. Okay, recognized experts. So, but now the same sectors or actors are silent on the issue of privatization of public space. This shows that what happened in 2012 in that issue, the success of the opposition against the construction of flyovers was not really a check on power. Rather, it showed precisely the panoptic operation of power. Okay? The success of the opposition against flyovers demonstrates the operation of power. That power works when it is able to efficiently co-opt its subjects, meaning in theory, that's basically civil society into a collaborative stance. So suddenly, because the vocal opposition against the privatization of the project, privatization project come from vendors, the cargadores, and stevedores, but the civil society is silent on the issue. So collaboration, it turns out, can reproduce the operative exclusions in third world spaces. And of course, as argued by Raf, by the regional forum in the previous node, the Bienal can be, unfortunately, can exemplify this kind of collaboration as well. A collaboration that reproduces the ecology of exclusions. So see that just like Raf, my reflection actually with regard to curation has led me to the problematic nature of exhibiting in the Bienal context. So if you remember, Raf asked us whether the physical exhibition is necessary to the kind of work that they do. And they realized that their field work, the conversations on the ground, actually consummate the art practice, and it is no longer necessary to proceed with the physical exhibition. That's what they say. As Raf said, the emancipatory dimension in collaborative practice occurs in the sustained, not merely durational, sustained engagement with development and cultural work. What they do, what these cultural workers, human rights workers, development workers perform in regional spaces. Just like the practices of our RAF members like Santi, the member of the RAF team, Ed, Eden, and so it is found not in the exhibitionary tactics and interventions of the Bienal or Art Festival. As a curator, I completely agree. But the question is not whether, I think, it's not whether there is a need for a physical exhibition. Rather, we just need to realize that the consummation of art practice and exhibition are actually enduring modalities that occur on the ground, not in the durational event like the Bienal. Because in the first place, the practices of human rights workers and development workers are not only durational in nature, they require a lifetime commitment, especially in our context, the Philippine context. So conversations occur and will occur regardless of the Bienal. The time frame, in fact, of community development work is the horizon of life itself. See, which is highlighted now by the recent assassinations of peasant and labor organizers or community workers. The work stopped. The work of those workers stopped when they were assassinated. So community work does not need the binary. That is what I'm saying. Rather, community work reveals to us that there are pretensions in the art world. And these pretensions, so to say, are probably inherent in the art world. So what I can do as a curator is to continue engaging the Binal during and even after Viva. I've already talked to the RAF team, and they plan to publish more contents. Okay, not only before but during the very duration of Viva. But not only for Viva's virtual spaces, and definitely not for the physical exhibition. Okay, but they are going to publish the works in different through virtual spaces, and RAF is also publishing its own, launching its own uh, rehabilitated website, so you can also publish them. But the works that they're going to publish may be critical of the binary format. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Please be critical. We're open to that, and in fact, that's important in our work. But the fact that you are engaging with us also should allow you to theorize also a level of complicity in the production of the Biennale. No? So this is not a case of an autonomy, no, but a critical, insertion into this object of desire, but also object of critique. No? So thank you, Nomar, and always there is food in your in your presentation. So that is something very encouraging. So Mars, can you follow through?
Okay. As for the projection, can we move to the next slide? Okay. So in terms of the question about projection, um, I think that prefacing and then positing interpretations is one way to present the work and to render it sensible. Uh, Next slide. As in the increments, presenting the projects will involve prefacing them and then positing interpretations of them. For example, my introductions of RVs and POPOS increments in the Viva XCon website. Aside from the textual format of introducing the projects or parts of it, Papa Masqual suggested, for example, she suggested that this could also be by way of a recorded conversation, which is interesting because her project explores sound, and to do the preface in audio recording format would demonstrate maybe how our reflections on her work may be instantiated by the acoustic quality of this format of the conversation. Uh, in fact, in a way, this happened in her increment, which was a video recording from Kalibutan Seminar Note 2, in which she was talking about her project Hingalo. So the soundscape of that video recording, uh, she was deliberately orchestrating by coughing in parts of her talk and later on editing that recording by overlaying other breathing and ambient sounds. But in terms of presenting it, I felt like I had to preface that increment through writing because it was the first one, as the first increment of that work that was released. And it would have been too convoluted to also preface it in audio format right away. So we are exploring how the next possible increment could be prefaced or introduced through a recorded conversation. Um, Next slide. In the case of RB Sanchez's figure drawing, um, these are the faces of his project. But for the final exhibition, RV plans to do an interactive video installation piece within the exhibition space and participatory online performance, as he said in his in the write-up he gave me. Um, he will do a photo performance art, as he called it, where he will act as a model for a life drawing class. And there will be 10 photos of him in different poses. Uh, he will have the video installation and the materials for the life drawing session set up in a gallery where the screen showing the photos of him in different poses will be surrounded by canvases on easels for exhibition goers to participate in the life drawing class. But there's also the virtual aspect of this interactive feature of his project. So there's people in the exhibition space who are going to be physically drawing on the canvas, and there's also or pieces of paper, and there's also people online who are encouraged to also participate in a live drawing class uh, through a link to be clicked that will lead them to the the video piece showing the slides showing the uh, photos of him in different poses. Uh, so in RV's proposed um, work for how to present the work, there's this duality, diba, of doing it in physical space, but also in the virtual dimension. And I think this duality points to that contingency then that Maria mentioned a while ago. And in the pandemic, more pronouncedly, there is contingency, and then our plans could be uh, what they call that could shift. And so there's this contingent aspect in RD's work, because of that duality of having it in a physical space and in a virtual platform as well. And with this duality and then hybridity of the work and the ways to present it, I also wondered about whether this hybridity could be because of our growing awareness of the contexts in which we communicate, the virtual and the face-to-face interactions, the growing awareness of the fact that we have been interacting naman virtually even before the pandemic, but now we are reflecting upon it more profoundly because of our situation, because of how we do most of the work remotely. Finally, as I was saying, the slide about involving audiences, I'm going to talk about in this second question. Uh, Next slide. Okay, so in terms of involving audiences, I think there may be more impulse to make audiences more actively involved. I guess to make up for the lack of experience in a physical exhibition space, at least in the increments or the parts of the works that come before their final production in a physical exhibition. So the question of changes in my perception of curatorial practice, and also in terms of presenting the work and making it, rendering it sensible, um, is in one way also a question of the limitations and opportunities of the absence of physical space and interactions. Uh, and In a way, my projection is also still just a reflection. So it's mostly questions like what are the logistical challenges, for example? What subjectivities are we addressing through the modality by which we present the work to audiences? For example, through virtual or digital platforms, and and think of the digital divide, let's say, and like how that impacts the curatorial practice, diba? But at the same time, with the remote or virtual modality, maybe we're also opening the works to subjectivities and audiences that would otherwise have never experienced these works. Uh, so these are my projections in terms of the Kalibutan exhibition.
Thank you, Mars, and thank you also for mentioning the increments, no? Because these increments are part of this not exhibition mode, no? So meaning that Viva actually, the Kalibutan exhibition is already unfolding, no? It's not that we wait for July to see it happen. It is already happening, no? So it's been going on. So whatever happens in July is part of this unfolding. It's not a culmination. No? It's just an unfolding. To part of the unfolding to address a certain expectation of the Binali model, which I think Nomar is right to critique, no? Because this expectation tends to inhere. And so all this intrinsic demands have to be somehow ventilated, no? And made to come in contact with air, no? So that it changes somehow. They change somehow. So thank you, Mars. So we go to region 7, beginning with Maria. Hi, Maria. It's you again. Yeah.
Me again. Wait, yeah. So to answer the second question, I want to look at the work of another artist from Region 7, Gabi Nazareno.
Mhm.
Here's an image from her studio in Bohol, where she's been working on a series of drawings. So the material of this highly tactile work is pencil on handmade or reconstructed paper. So the work has been called a draw erase drawing by Sir Leo Abaya, who was her advisor at UP. Because the artist first draws an image of either a domestic or urban scene and then invites the audience to erase it while in the exhibition space. So what I find so interesting is that during lockdown, she was compelled to recreate this dynamic of audience and artwork in her studio. Because it's her drawing, but then the one who raises it is somebody from the audience, right, in the exhibition space. Um, so she was compelled to recreate this dynamic of audience and artwork in her studio, where she took on the proxy persona of a stranger encountering the work and performing the act of erasure. Next slide, please. So, artworks generate reality and generate knowledge, but for certain work, this is incomplete if they are not able to do so in space and through and to generate this knowledge through the encounter. So I suppose for some work to be fully sensible, it's to be able to project a presence. In Gabby's case, an introduction to the unseen aspect of layering the drawn and erased images for a fuller understanding of the work was helpful. The artist was able to do this in her videos that appear on the Viva website, where she gives us a glimpse of her process. and also it's super generously even a glimpse of her persona as the stranger. I really like the durability of the fictional space that the artist has created as a matter of contingency. In doing this, she's managed to make a kind of, she also kind of, I don't know if accidentally or very much on purpose, she's managed to make a kind of palimpsest, like another one, a layering of her studio and the more public exhibition spaces that is necessitated by the form of her artwork. So through this year, we've extended the ways in which we can come together and the ways in which we communicate. In the urgency of the moment, we might be tempted to think of exhibition making, the exhibition, as a slow and bureaucratic form that is poorly suited to times of emergency. But I but I think feeling like this is only because we miss the energy generated by people and the artwork and people and artwork in a room. Because of this past year, I think we can all really feel that knowledge generation isn't an academic activity. It's the stuff of life rather, and it exists in the social. Um, although artists have a tenuous relationship, of course, with sociality, especially as it's related to a public. Also something to really consider when considering the way that Gabby has chosen to problem solve this aspect of her work. So finally, the work will appear as planned in the exhibition space at Gallery Orange. That's my very short response to this question.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, it's interesting to how this will play out, no? In an exhibitionary setting, because exhibitions for their problems, no, also have a certain potential, no? A unique ability also to gather people and also to create a certain consciousness about about the material, no? Something that other modes cannot maybe address or not in the same way, no? As exhibition. So we look at this potential as we at the same time that we try to reformulate it. No? Thank you, Maria. So Jay, Lee, can you follow through with the same question on projection? I don't think he knows it's okay.
Okay, sorry. Good morning again, everyone. So, as I reflect upon the series of activities that me and the artists have done for Viva, I've realized the importance of the increments that Sir Patrick has envisioned for this particular edition of the Viva in response to the pandemic, which I personally would think that I have not fully understood as a curator. Why it's there and why it should. The Sir Patrick was mentioning about the potentials of this particular aspect of the exhibition, that it's already unfurling, and that the exhibition in July is not a sort of culmination of this entire process. And so my projection for the projects that I've worked with, Mona and Solitario Cinco, was the idea of participatory, for the public to at least acknowledge its presentness and its sensibility. But what is also apparent is that this presentness and sensibility and being sensible does not only apply to the public. It's first and foremost applies to me, to the artist, as we try to talk about and to recalibrate certain aspects of what we've envisioned. And so because initially I never mentioned to the artist the possibility of an exhibition. So I really challenged them to think of other ways. The Solitario were thinking of putting up a website and do a series of what do you call it? Materials that the public can interact with through the website. And then Mona Alcudia's Peacock Chair, though it the original project is intended to be a physical exhibition where audience for the project to be participatory, audience would have to sit on the peacock while they would sing along with the karaoke. And so when I told Mona that there's no exhibition, she was trying to look for ways to look for an application and a software in the public and the general public can tune in via the internet to a site where a possible karaoke activity can be done in. But initially it's very hard for them to work around these parameters, but they were able to draw in certain directions. But when the Viva called for the meeting and asked us to submit an object list, so I told them, "Oy, may exhibit sa July 14 ang opening." I can really sense that nag-iba ang dynamics nila. Ay, may physical exhibition. Perhaps we can put in something like this and some I can bring a chair there, or I can bring some paintings or some works there. So parang what I've seen sa response nila is that strong pa rin talaga ang affinity natin for the exhibitionary as that manifestation of the curatorial. And so this is something that I'd want to reflect upon, that for the project to move forward, both Mona and Solitario, is to play around the digital platform and hybrid forms, so that we can still see a different how these projects would fare in a non-exhibitionary format, which I am very excited about. But also the idea of going to Bacolod, or being like that kuano is the viva kind of spirit na mag abot-abot lahat, and you can see the works of others. I think that also excites the artist. And so we are coming up with how we can, because we're from Cebu, how we can manage to put in some material presence in the space. But even without that, I think the projects can manifest themselves in the digital format or in the virtual format. So parang ganyan. So thank you.
So the question really is, what does it take, no, to be? What does it take, and what does it mean to be present and to be sensible? And there are many ways to respond to that. And you're right about the exhibition within the Viva dynamic, no, that it is not only a bureaucratic. It's not only a bureaucratic requirement. It is also necessary for the convivial spirit that Viva has always fostered. No? So this coming together around an exhibition and around a conference is vital in the life of Viva, even as we are also trying to be critical about its form. So I think it is the form that is the issue here, that it can take on other forms. Now this exhibition still within the convivial dynamic, no? Or the part of community making that Viva has put in place over time. Thank you, Jay. So Libby, we go to Region 6, beginning
Yes.
with Libby, good morning again.
Good morning again. Slide, please. Back, back, please. Sorry, not yet. So while they're fixing the slides, I'd just like to continue first with the thought of preparation. So to be prepared to be for this present and sensible, you have to have maraming baon, to have a lot of patience, like that of a gardener or yung nag-aalaga ng hayop, because you have to monitor every day. And also parang doctor, you have to diagnose or give a cure for yung mga sickness. And also parang panday din, you have to build new things or fix things. And parang ano din, naghahanda ka sa isang magandang masayang party that you want everyone to enjoy the food, the program, and the interaction. So going back to being present and sensible, kailangan mo diyan ng yung observation, careful observation of what are the current concerns, like here sa amin sa Iloilo and Panay, and also the things that needs attention, and what also I considered what are the interests of young and the old. And it also I was reminded from one of the webinars na na-attend ko din to go back to your roots and bring them to your present. So it's revisiting kung ano ka ba talaga yung tunay mo identity and what you have and what you can do with it. And so the words traditions and current trends came to mind. So sa akin, it also brings words like the new media and new expressions. So for right now, we have kailangan natin ng next slide please. Kailangan natin ng yung mobility natin, we have to adjust from physical to the virtual mobility, and yes, I have mentioned earlier, we have to use and learn the new tools to communicate kasi hindi na tayo makapag face-to-face due to the present condition. Next slide, please. And yes, that understanding of heritage cycle helped me a lot because um, you will have a clear picture on the understanding, the valuing, the caring, and the the idea of how will you make your audience enjoy, and for your people kung saan ka na belong to enjoy this unique heritage that you have. In the case of AR Sculptura and ICANN, um, our sources um, are available on printed material, oral tradition, and non-print and unpublished materials. But these artists are new to Viva XCon exhibits, so I really have to take time to let them understand what's going on, and dun yung ano yung kanina sinasabi din ng isang curator na you have to be patient with and yung appreciate also the time kasi every webinar dito sa VivXCon is also their time to learn kasi nga hindi nagkakaroon ng physical interaction. It's also their time to learn what's going on and what is really VivaXCon about. Next slide, please. So yes, these ideas from archiving help me a lot because I have a lot of data pero hindi ko rin na-organize na maayos, and yung access also to data is also difficult for the artist because it's oral tradition ang aming reference and maraming limits. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this diagram helped us para to understand the flow of what's going on in the case of AR Sculptura and the ICANN. Next slide, please. So yung default exhibition is, di ba, pwedeng merong figures or performances because they are planning to have a retablo and cosplay. But because of the limitations of pandemic, we also thought of other ways na on how to present this, like negotiating for a remote space other than the Gallery Orange. We have started negotiations with Ilomoca kung saan pwede ilagay ng AR Sculptura yung kanilang works, continuing works in progress, and also for ICANN to use the virtual spaces for their cosplay to have a life of its own. And next slide, please. And I was also thinking about like the ideas behind the scores or screenplays or recipes wherein kahit hindi mo magawa ngayon, at least pwedeng gawin ng future artist kung saan man sila or kung ano ka man with the same kind of sound or the same kind of experience of understanding the story or the same kind of taste. So ganyan yung medyo napoproject ko for the future exhibits of the AR Sculptura Retablo and the cosplays of ICANN. And next slide, please. So AR Sculptura, from being architects and makers of large-scale public figures for display, they also had this experience allowed them to have time to internalize and share the stories that they have noted about the mythology to their kids. So this image shows the kids of AR Sculptura artists having an interpretation of a character from the oral tradition. So in that sense, it also gives them a different kind of experience other than a regular experience of being an architect and builders. because of this experience with understanding the oral tradition of Bukidnon. And another thing that also, next slide please, that we have encountered delays because the material coming from the indigenous people needs free and prior informed consent. So the pandemic also has affected the delays in processing of their permits, and that's one of the things that we learned, and recalibrating on what can be done with their original proposal, and uh, also trying to beat the deadline for the physical exhibit of the Bacolod Orange project. So yun lang po yung nasi-share ko about the experiences of AR Sculpture and ICANN. And in view of this making of the exhibits present and of this present
Insensible.
providing and present and sensible.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Libby. And last but not the least, Gwen, to the question of projection. Please, your turn.
Okay. So for me, the struggle of achieving or finding equivalence is not just a menace to this practice, but it is also a gift. Ideas possess a kind of impenetrability because concepts too, in a way, are already objects. Perhaps this is why the struggle of how they will take form through collaboration, like an artist and a curator, has its complications, because ideas tend to cause friction in a way. But at the same time, they are elastic. And the diversity of possible executions, translations of this single idea allow for a more elastic practice of communication. So from an infinite array of possibilities, the struggle is how to settle down into one concrete thought, idea, or form. And in a way, this is exactly why communication and interpretation exists. So I would like to give an example with one artist, Perry Arhel. His art object and concept is Ilistaran, which is his house. So the existence of art elements of the exhibit outside the gallery space and the concept of an exhibit is itself part of Perry Arhel's practice. That art has something with a life of its own, like, or for him, it is a ritual of daily living. So what happened was actually we added function to the place. The space and objects are changed through a different layer of perception on it. And rather than making a material or a structure, in a sense, experiencing the sense of an exhibit differently. So encountering content also in a different way. So the struggle here is the complications that came with giving additional functions and layers of meaning to his house. Like it entails an overlapping of modes of controlling its accessibility. Since this is a space also for his family where he lives, it is a studio, an art structure, and for Viva, it is an exhibition object. So this reconciling of ideas and forms is also in a way making forms and concepts compatible with the needs that entail it. For Perry Arhel, the immersive experience is very, very important. Being able to actually walk inside the house, interacting with the objects, and so on. is the ideal way of presenting. But then again, losing this element, this quality, became indirectly a part of the concept's evolution. This made us consider, for example, video, photos, and process making became more vital this time. And this was supplemented through increments. So maybe what I found in as a whole is that art is the making of novel associations. And these associations make art so adaptive. It shows the situational aspect of art and artists during the pandemic. And also that the not exhibition part is offering knowledge and insights that are automatically world property the moment we share it. That's all.
Thank you, Gwen, and thank you to all the curators. We can now gather for a conversation. We can now stop sharing, Ida, and maybe we can all be in one room. Oh, in one on one screen. No? So it is clear that in our work as curators for Kalibutan, that we are informed by our our previous or even current roles, no, in the social world. So we are artist curators, we are academic curators, we are organizer curators, or art activist curators. No? So there's that hyphen or slash or whatever, however you'd like to connect the two. So my question is, how do you think the curator part through the experience with Viva would change the artist part, the academic part, the organizer part, or the activist part? Because the first part surely has informed your curatorial approach. No, that's very clear. But I was wondering how you think your curatorial experience would change the first part, because these are mutually constitutive now. They're mutually constitutive. They should transform each other, and they're not binarisms. No, so I sort of expect some kind of third moment between the in the back and forth between the two, that the energy there of movement produces something else that would change your being an artist and also the idea of being curator. So you like to move beyond the the binary, because you have had the experience to be both already, and that the binary cannot hold, no, because it's not productive. Of course, everyone can speak to this, but maybe we can be brief and to the point, because we also have questions from the audience. No? Anyone who'd like to first take a stab at this question? Anyone? Maybe Maria? Or si Libby ba?
Libby, do you want to go?
Artist.
Sige, baka mawala pa eh. So, mga analogy ko lang is parang siguro parang yung batang walang parents and then ngayon naging parent na siya. So, it will make you a better artist because you know what's the experience of what to teach your child. So, in my experience, wala talaga kaming dito eh. Wala talaga kang curator experience sa ako, at least personally. So I was wanting all the time to have a curated show, to have curated shows with friends, pero wala sa aming realm talaga. So salamat Sir Patrick at naisipan na-invite niyo din ako. I was away. I was not here in the Philippines during that time. Nagulat ako, tapos sabi ko, sige, pag nakauwi, I will try to attend the meeting. And then kinakabahan din ako noon kasi it was a turning point in my life din na pwede hindi ako umuwi or
Yeah,
and
like Joar's appendicitis. Anyway, turning point. So yeah, I think mahalaga yon yung, because we think of our roles as isolated, no, from other roles in the ecology that Nomar was saying. But we can see that they can be, they can be connected, they can be like interlocutors of each other. And so, yeah. So thank you, Libby. Maria.
Um, I think as an artist now, I definitely will start sending emails more promptly. Nice to the curators I work with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, like I feel like itong experience like it made me a little bit more ready, I guess, for helping out with my mom's space sa,
Mm-hmm.
Dumaguete. So ito yung practical aspect. I mean, and it's really great that retired artist who I'm working with is from Dumaguete, lives in Dumaguete. So
Mm-hmm.
parang may parang more like a social base, I guess. I mean, because I was always away from Dumaguete, I was always living in Manila. Eh. So maganda siyang parang starting point for me, like sort of like yeah, sort of an opening into the community there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Maria. And Gwen is also an artist. So, yeah,
Yeah.
your thoughts, yeah.
Recently, I also had a talk with UP students, and they actually asked me this: what? Why am I an artist and a curator too? So there are difficulties of trying to explain this. I tried to say that there is a need for a curator, and that's why I am here to fill that need. So there is a need that arises. So this difficulty of labeling, like, no, you're supposed to just do this, and so there is a difficulty on my part, especially because, like Maria, I also don't want to be labeled as a curator because I am an artist, and in a wider aspect, like just looking why both the artist and the curator is there is more important. I think this is what the problem solving quality, the conversation that exists because of this is more effective, and that's what I realized also.
Thank you, Gwen. And Jay, Mars, and Nomar are within educational institutions. They are professors of art, they are critics, historians, and other things besides, administrators too within schools. So maybe you can also speak to this question of the hyphenated, the hyphenated condition of your work. Yeah, maybe Jay first.
Okay, mauna ko. Kanang, I think it's hyphenated. There's a reason why it's hyphenated, and these things are hyphenated because these things can go together, and they have similarities, they have commonalities that's important to highlight. What I've seen, the idea of the artist and the curator, the educator and the curator becomes very clear to me through UP, and how personally how promotions in UP are done, because in UP Cebu, curat curator I have difficulties for my curatorial projects to pass as a creative work, because people don't understand, the ones sitting in the ECPFC or in the ones who give points to the creative work, because they don't understand that their expectation for anyone who's teaching in the fine arts program is to do exhibitions, is to create works, paintings and design works, and then join exhibitions, join art fairs, join design shows. But for curatorship, that's something that they are not familiar. So I really have difficulties explaining this to them, that curatorial work is in itself a creative act, a very creative act. And that's why in the categories of possible works that can be part of creative output of a faculty. Curatorial projects are there. And so, yeah, I see curatorial work as much as I produce a painting or I do a design work. It's that process, that level of the creative spirit that's involved in that process. And so it informs being a curator and at the same time being an educator and an artist and a designer is kuan ka ng usa na siya swak usa na siya they can
interwoven or intertwined.
yes
Okay.
intertwined.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Maybe Mars. Mars.
For this is actually one of my reflections then when I talked about the first question on how are the roles and agencies of artist, curator, and then the audience being rethought or redescribed in this uh, pandemic and in the context of doing Viva remotely for the most part. I think the curator educator phrase is less dichotomous naman than curator artist, because I've always experienced teaching as curatorial then, because it's all about how you select content and present it in certain ways to your students. It's a way of shaping how knowledge will be experienced by your students. So there is a curatorial impulse inherent in teaching. So I kind of I'm able to more clearly derive from these aspects of my subjectivity in order to go through each of them. Kumbaga, to accomplish the tasks associated with each of them. Yeah, so there's the uh, curation, and then the work of an educator naman is also it involves critical and creative efforts, no, and not only because I'm teaching art or critical perspectives in the arts or Philippine culture and the arts, um, Philippine arts and culture, sorry. Not only because of that, but I think any kind of a subject you teach naman, it's really curatorial. It's all about thinking of your audiences and putting yourself in their shoes, and thinking about whether the way you deliver the knowledge or the content is the best way for the kind of audience you have. So there's the creative, critical, and conceptual aspects that bleed into each other in being a curator and an educator, or maybe someone also interested in creative endeavors. Although not a practicing artist as some of my co-curators are. As a curator and educator, there are all these layers and qualities that are there at varying extents, but constantly contribute to reshaping my subjectivity and my work as a someone who is in the academe and also engaged in curation, starting to be engaged in the work of curation.
Yeah, thank you, Mars. Every class is a seminar.
Yes.
Seminar is always curated. Nomar, your take on this?
Yeah. Yeah, see, Mars already mentioned this about renegotiating agency. And that's also my take.
Yeah.
I think because I see myself as an artist first before before even. And as an artist, we tend to be sometimes control freaks. We want to control the outcome of what we're doing, because that is, I think that is more like a traditional conception of art making, that we need to be the work proceeds from us, from our own agency. But in curation, that's not actually the case, because we need to be collaborative. So, kumbaga, it teaches us to relax. And it, for me, it's the the academic setting itself. Like, I'm also a teacher, so it teaches me how to trust my students more. Now, because it's saying, okay, students actually can bring so many things in the classroom. It's not just me trying to teach them something or new things.
Yeah.
So it actually teaches me to relax, and I think
Yeah.
that's my thing.
Yeah, to be more maybe open and
Okay.
yeah, give them the chance, no? Because it's a seminar, no? So they also are co-producers of the knowledge. And then my last question, because we're running out of time, there's a question from the audience. What changes have you observed in terms of the attitude of artists towards the style of curation that you introduce to them? So I'm also interested in that. Yung reception ba, I mean, yeah, of course, they might feel that curators are powerful, they impose certain
Yeah.
things on artists, but we have rethought that, no, in within Viva, and we try to be more relational and intersubjective. So, and we also try to complicate modes of presentation, like it could be an exhibition, also not exhibition. We also introduce the incremental aspect of it, that it moves, not it moves patiently across time. So these are new things maybe, and not part of the imagination, the common imagination of how curatorial work should proceed. So the question is from the audience: how did your artists respond to this mode, or this method? Yeah, maybe very briefly lang, because we are almost out of time. Or anyone who would like to I'm not pressuring everyone to answer, but those who want to, please do.
Well, I guess I was very, I guess I was very surprised that the artist, well, retired artist, agreed in the first place to do something, because she hasn't done an exhibition a very long time, like 10 years. So that was a pleasant surprise. Yeah, I wasn't expecting a positive, response when I asked her if she wanted to do something.
Right.
And I intentionally sort of wanted to confuse being an artist and being a curator, because number one, I don't have I don't have any preconceptions about being a curator, so I wanted to confuse the two, and I wanted to behave more like an artist, like friend, like a conversation partner, a thinking partner.
Mhm.
um and I think naman sana this has been helpful for the artists, and I've been able to sort of communicate properly using being this.
Yeah, and
um,
you can also see the fruits of your effort with the kind of work that is produced now.
yeah
Yeah,
yeah,
it
totally.
also shows if the process is productive,
Yeah,
because the work is interesting, or it tries to move away from certain expectations. Yeah,
yeah, it
so
becomes something.
become something else, no? So yeah, and maybe also trust, no, is important. You earn the trust. I mean, maybe the retired artist also knows about your work, and
Mm.
yeah, so that's important too. I mean, if it's a cold call from a stranger, that might be more difficult, and it would take more time for that trust to be earned, no?
Yeah,
And as curators, because we cannot only work with the people we know or the people we like, di ba? We should also work with art that we cannot understand, or people we don't like, although that's hard, but uh, that's a possibility, and that requires more effort, to gain trust, or to find an entry point, no,
Mm.
into that person. So anybody else would like to
Okay.
respond? Olivia?
So yeah, uh, I in my way I understand it through context, and their response is also they are considerate, because the artists that I chose are people who are also busy teaching, doing films,
Hmm.
so talagang mahirap yung time, and then uh, there are some groups na medyo resistant kasi nag-a-adjust sa kind of format, lalo na sa research portion. But I really appreciate that they are considerate. And for the case of Farida's team and AR Sculptura, because we are only here in Iloilo, so we communicate well and makapagkita pa kami before the MECQ. But in the case of ICANN, because they're in Rojas, we have to rely on communications in the internet. So medyo may gap doon. And so we have to work on it talaga para to succeed and to make their work thrive or their vision happen in magandang realization.
That's part of caring too, no? That you care for them because they have other things to do. Yeah, so the question is, who takes care of the curator?
Ikaw, sir.
Saan ba tayo hihingi ng kalinga? No? Jay, may masagot ka ba dyan? May kumakalinga ba sa'yo?
I think it's mutual. The moment you show and care to the people, to your artist, they also are very respectful. They also are caring to you. They also invite you to dinners or to their studio and just talk. I think it's very mutual. The moment you engage with them with kindness and with trust, ganun based sa amin.
Yeah, generosity and gratitude are important in this work, and sometimes they are scarce commodities these days. So anyone, maybe one more, and then we can wrap this up. Anyone from those who haven't spoken? Kung may masasabi ba? Kung wala na, then I'd like to thank Jay, Maria, Mars, Libby, Gwen, and Nomar for making the time this Saturday morning. This is our last node, no? And then I don't know if you are going to miss these Zoom meetings.
Yes.
But maybe later we will miss. I mean, maybe 10 years, we will have nostalgia for Zoom.
Actually, every learning, yung question na pagsagot, sir, ngayon ko, mas malinaw siya right after the conversations. So we will really miss this.
Okay. Sige, that's good to know. And so we also would like to invite the audience for another Zoom meeting next week. And this is on museum management projections after the pandemic with Jun Yap of the Singapore Art Museum and Nikita Yingqian of the Times Museum in Guangzhou in the People's Republic of China. Rika Estrada of the Cultural Center of the Philippines will moderate. And we will also have an island special on June 26, featuring the artists and cultural workers of Negros Oriental. So please save the Saturday date for these events. So with that, we'd like to thank everyone. Ida, is my task done? Okay na ba? Anyway, so thank you everyone and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Salamat.
Hey, ang mga uwak gahulat sang akon kamatayon, dion na nga bag-uhon ang banas sang panglakaton. Numanang madangtan sa pinili kong dalan, kabay nga hindi pa ulihi ang tanan. Di nang mga sinya sa cross nga alagyan, ang talagog talang-talang, nagtalang-talang, gatalang-talang, dapa-dapanaga padayon sa panglakaton. Uy, iining sa imo paminsaron kag balatyagon uy ining mga buhat nga dalalon dali na kay maimo ta sang bag-o nga kalibutan ako namigo gugma ang hari sa duta ray ng kalibayan ako nga abiyan magiliuso sa kausa sang kahilwayan peace be with you man right. Yeah, pa 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 pa. Yeah. Alright. Feeling the blue. Yeah. Woo. Yeah. Mga abyan ko sa ining tinion ipabutsyag sa katawhan ang imo nga nabalan ang kaalam ngaging bungkal sa kadutaan ipalapnag mo sa hangin ang unod sining sugilanon para mga tubang hangkat sang henerasyon tanga mga katawhan nagtuhaw sa kadutaan ibalik ta ang balanse sang kalibutan mahimo ta sang bag-o nga alagyan padulong sa promisa nga katutaan ako namigo gugma ang hari sa duta ray ng kalibayan ako nga abiyon magiliusa sa kausa sang kahilwayan ang paghidait yara sa imo kag yara man sa amon